grade it, I give you feedback. That's a self-contained item. And then if you want to take the feedback that I give you and modify it or do whatever you want to do to it, that gives you sort of another crack at the bat, so to speak. It gives you a chance to sort of fix it up, do different things with it, and then resubmit it as part of your FIP. So I would be inclined myself to choose my FIP theme to do most of the homework assignments that we've been working on throughout the term. Certainly in the case of the Cinemagraph, they're not terribly difficult to put together, I guess depending on what your source material is and what your idea is. If it's a really creative, clever idea, it could maybe take you a little bit longer to edit that stuff. But this allows you to create a video file that then could be part of your website. And I'm assuming that most of you are looking for ways to sort of fill in your website with content. Well, what do you do with a product that's a bottle and a can? It's a drink. It's really a glorified advertisement, right? That's all these websites are. If you go to Pepsi, you go to Coke, you go to Sprite, you go to any, you go to Red Bull. All of them are really just glorified advertisements for their product line. And so that's what you're doing. And so, well, what do? Lots of photos, lots of video, right? So you're doing 3D models. Take advantage of your 3D model. Do a really good job with your 3D model, and you can produce all sorts of still images that would populate your website, and then you can also do some video out of that and create video files that also could be part of your website. So the 3D work that you're doing is a really, really important part of this, not only to make it look good, look professional, look like it's an actual product that exists, but also you can get a lot of the assets for your website for this, or for this entire project for this. So Cinemagraph could work, and one example of it might be, maybe you have it running in the top, sort of the hero area. It's a hero image, but it's a video. And then you have some markup that's styled, that sits on top, and it talks about your brand or something like that. So anything where you can get some movement going on a website, especially for something like this, these websites tend to be fairly kinetic, meaning that there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of promotional things, because there's really not much more you can do. You can sort of talk about the product history, maybe. You can talk about maybe its ingredients. Most don't even do that. So there's not really much you can do. So it's up to you. Anyway, there's the homework number 4, the last homework assignment. So we have that one. And then we have our checkpoint on week 13 for the FIP. And then week 14, you'll be submitting your total finished product for the Final Integrator project. Any questions or concerns about anything, maybe even specifically the FIP?
Do you have an example of this, like a student have done it or something?
I don't at the moment. I did show some was it last week? I think it was last week I showed some. And they were, remember it was Budweiser? Oh, maybe I did it, I think it was last week. It was the week before. No, it was the week before when we did Cinemagraphs. I showed, remember we had there was the Budweiser, so the bottle was spinning around. There was, yeah, so there were 2 of those. That was the example. I don't have any others on hand. I'd have to sort of dig them up. But really, it's, yeah, just sort of, it could be you. You could get someone to videotape you, videotape, that's archaic, film you with their camera or whatever they have, or whatever you have. And then you could do something with that footage where you're using your product, right? So today, what we're gonna do, in part, what we're gonna do with today's lesson is we're gonna work with a green screen, okay? So there's another possibility for you to work with a green screen, incorporate that as part of your Cinemagraph. And it's really cool working. I love working with green screens because you can just do really cool stuff with it. Yeah, so we'll get that going. As part of the Tesla, little Tesla segment that we're doing. So bear with me one second. Let me just bring up the video. Let me find it. And I'll show you the video. So show you what we're working toward in terms of the video. so this is what we're gonna create. As soon as it starts to show. Okay, so there's our Tesla logo from last week that we created. And then we're gonna create this part today, the interior of that sequence. So where this comes from, I'll show you the still image that we're actually gonna be using that I've taken it from. It's part of a promotional thing for Tesla. So, you know, cars come out, whatever products come out, and they do these promotional videos. So this little segment right here was just showing you how some of the functionality of the inside of the car works. And it was a series of different little segments, little sequences that were all thread together into a finished commercial, and then it ends, the whole thing ends with the Tesla logo. So what I did is I said, okay, let's just focus on doing one of the sequences, and I chose this one. And part of this is, okay, well, if I'm looking at this, and this is like old design, when you look at anything, you start looking at it and breaking it down. How did they create this? How did they do this? Well, the actual Tesla commercial or segment from that commercial, there's a camera in the back seat, and the camera is filming, and it starts to push in gradually into the front. So that's that zooming motion that we see. And then the person that's in the driver's seat is interacting with the console, okay? And then we have a transition that then goes to the animated logo, okay? Now, it's a little bit different. I've added some elements to it, things like some GUI features like this here, the numbers, and the overlay information and that sort of thing. We probably won't do all of this because it was part of a larger lesson. I really just want us to get the main sequence done. And again, it's all based on the idea that, okay, if I wanted to recreate this fairly consistently with the original, how would I go about doing it? Okay, what do I need? So what do I need? What are the things that I need to recreate this?
You mean in order to record it from zero? Or like
If I said, go make this little segment that's about to play here, I want you to go make this. How would you go about doing it? And you don't have a Tesla, okay? So how do you do it?
Search interior images.
Yeah, and that's where I got them, right? Yeah, I just went and searched out the interior images. I needed a moving part of that, so I needed a person to actually interact with it, so I needed to film that. And then I actually just scooped the seats from the original video. We'll look at that in 1 second. Now, there is a problem with this as we're looking at this, and I must have just moved the keyframe and then didn't really focus on it or didn't notice it when I went to produce the movie, or output the movie. The camera stops halfway through. That's a very awkward sort of, see how it goes and then it stops. It shouldn't do that. So the camera should continuously be moving from the start of the video to the very end of the video, okay? The idea with video is there should always be something moving. That's what the cinemagraph is. It's a static image, essentially, but there's something in it that's moving, that makes it look like video. So let's start building this. So again, if you want to go to Content Week 10 and just grab our Week 10 Design and Image Tesla lesson assets, we'll start working with it. We'll open up After Effects. Effects. Just get to this stage here. Now, all applications do the same thing in terms of file and being able to either place, like it would be in Illustrator, or import files into it. That's probably the way you want to go about it more often than not, because what it does is it allows you to sort of create linking the content, okay? And you'll know where it is because you've got to go through this process of searching it. And it puts everything sort of content. What you really should do is when you're going to start a project, assuming that we have all the files for the project, or at least we have the files that we're going to use to start the project, you should put them all in the same folder. Oftentimes, I'm sure you do the same thing that I do, where you've got content all scattered all over your computer in different folders, different locations, and you sort of pull from there. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it makes it problematic when you're like, oh, where was that file? Where did I grab that from? Especially if the link gets broken, if you move this project file or something. So you really do want to relocate all your files into one convenient storage area and then work directly from that. So I would go file import. Of course, we can always drag in. The only danger with dragging in is you've got to know where that file is when you're dragging it in so that you can always go back to it, okay? So let's grab what we're going to use as the aspect ratio of our video. So we're going to go to the very bottom file, the Tesla commercial video still interior.jpg. Pull that into your project window over here. We'll make sure it says project. And then pull it in. Okay, there we are. So that is our, let's just double click on that. That is the video still from the original sequence, from the original commercial. Okay, so there's the interior of the car and everything else. And so what we're gonna do is we're sort of gonna recreate that and build it from the assets that we've gathered from the internet. Now, why we're using this as a starting point is I needed the seats. And there aren't a lot of photos on the internet of the back of the front seats of the Tesla, or at least not shot like this. So I said, hey, I'm just gonna scoop this one from the still of the commercial. Everything else is from a different place altogether. So we've got that. So what we need to do, and again, why we wanna start with the seats is because this is taken from the video, so it's going to give us the exact aspect ratio of what the original video was. So we're going to use this to start everything off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the project window, click on the file, the only file that's there, and then hit enter or return. And I'm just going to type in the word seats. Okay, so I know that this image is my seats image. So again, when you pull files in, maybe you didn't name them anything in particular as source files, but when they come into this application, I would recommend at the very least changing them here. I would recommend changing them before you pull them in, but if you haven't done that, let's change them here so we know exactly what it is when we look at it. So what I want to do is I want to create a brand new composition that is going to be based off of the properties of this particular image. So I want to click on the icon and drag it down to the new composition icon, which is down here. Okay, as soon as I do that, it pops open seats in there, okay? Now, I'm going to change the composition name. You can do it by clicking on the composition and hitting enter or return again, or by selecting that composition. That's the one with the colorful icon on the left, the RGB icon. We can go into composition, not new composition like we did last week with Tesla, because we are creating a brand new composition. This time we already have the composition, we want to change its settings. So I'm going to go into composition settings, and I'm going to call this Tesla Interior. And that is going to be the name of the movie that is this sequence, okay? It's 1400 786. That's just based off of the original image. I leave it exactly like that. This is a time where you might go, what do I want my pixel aspect ratio to be? I'm going to leave it at the default, which is square pixel. It's going to be based off of that. So I'll leave that as is. You can change your frame rate. So 24 frames, I'll leave it at that. But bear in mind that this is going to be a larger file than if I cut it in half and do it by 15. But 15 could produce a choppier looking video. So you have to sort of weigh one thing against the other. 15 is going to be a significantly smaller file, which is awesome, but it might not be as smooth as you'd like to do it or like it to be. What I would recommend is always produce your video at the highest quality at the frame rate that you think is going to be the best, and then we can always change these properties when we go to create the actual movie, the MP4, that we're going to use for our website. So I'm going to leave it at 24. Zero your time code out, probably already your start time code set to 0. That's just meaning that we're going to start this whole thing at 0. And then for duration, let's go down to the seconds and put 4 second long animation. And the reason it's 4 seconds is simply because the video that we're using of the person reaching out and touching the screen is 4 seconds long. So the video needs to be as long, or it doesn't necessarily need to be as long as that video, but it can't be longer than that video because the video stops. So it's a 4 second long video. Okay, everything else looks good. Say okay to that. So there we go. Up in our project window, we have the file that we brought in. This is linking to an external file, seats, and then directly below that is the composition that we built off of that file called seats, and we renamed it Tesla Interior because it's going to be the main movie that we're, in fact, we could put main there if we wanted to. Let's go in and go Tesla Interior, and I'm going to call it a movie, main movie, just so we know when we look at it and read that, that's the main movie. And then we should save it because we haven't saved it yet, so do a save. I'm just going to call it Tesla Interior main movie. It really doesn't matter. Just call it something that tells you that this is going to be the sequence that is the interior sequence, and a main movie is sort of redundant. You don't really need that, but we'll put it in there just so it echoes what's going on here in terms of our composition. Okay, so with the seats layer selected in our timeline, let's hit S. S is simply a quick command to allow us to access the scale transform that is connected to any object that we have in our timeline. So I'm going to toggle this closed, toggle it open just to show you. As soon as you create an object, you're going to have transform functions. Okay, as we already know, we looked at this last week, but there it is. If you don't want to toggle everything open, I don't want to worry about all these other things. I just want to get into scale. That's why we hit S. Okay. But we have a whole bunch of things that we can control this image with. We have anchor point position, we have position, so left and right, top and bottom movement, X and Y values. We have scale factors, we have rotation, so 360-degree rotation, either negative or counterclockwise, clockwise, and then of course opacity. We can animate all of those, which is awesome, because sometimes that's really the bulk of your animations. You're making changes to these sorts of properties with your video. Anchor point is very similar to, and you'll notice that anchor point and position are identical in value. How they differ is position is going to move things based on where that anchor point position is. So as we can see right now, anchor point by default is in the center of our screen, our video, which is where it defaults in pretty much every application. But we can move that anchor point. So if I apply a rotation to this, a 360-degree rotation, by putting it right in here, this video is going to spin, but it's going to spin from the center. It's going to look like one of those things that you sort of blow on it, you put it out in the wind, and it spins. What are they called? No one? Anyone? Bueller? No one? A pinwheel. I don't even know if you said that, but that whatever you said triggered my memory. It's a pinwheel. So it would spin like that, right? But it would be pivoting from the center point. What if, though, I wanted to show this board here rotate to a vertical position rather than a horizontal position? I'd need to pivot it differently, and I'd put my pivot point here if I wanted to go back by 90 degrees, or if I wanted to go down by 90 degrees, I would put the pivot point there, or wherever I wanted to put it, in any one of the four corners. So I could take the anchor point position and relocate it, which then allows me to animate that differently. Okay, so anchor point and position can be the exact same thing in terms of left and right, top and bottom movement, but anchor point can control how or where that pivot is going to take place in terms of the rotation. So again, we're going to work with scale. We're at the very first keyframe of our timeline, which is where we want to be. So just hit or click on rather the stopwatch icon. Turns blue, it's active, it's saying, okay, we're going to animate this thing now. And it plugs in a keyframe in our timeline, and it also gives a keyframe indicator over to the left-hand side of that property. Now hit O on your computer, not 0, O, and that will move the playhead till the very, very end of this sequence. I want to click on the hollow diamond to plug in another keyframe for the end, okay? And then I want to, on any one of the two, click on the blue text, type in 110, 110%. So we're going to increase it by 110%. If I hit I on my computer, I will take me back to the very start of our timeline, and I hit play now, and now we're sequencing into the object. So as though the camera again is in the back seat and it's slowly being moved forward, or it's slowly zooming in. Okay? So we're sort of mimicking that motion. And we want to do that partly because we're trying to focus your attention on what is being interacted with, which is this. So we want to bring your attention, it's like tunnel, it's like a tunnel. We want that tunnel vision. And so we're guiding your eye, by that little bit of movement, we're guiding your eye into that position. And also, it is now we have something moving on screen in our video the entire time, which is what we want with animation. We don't want static content, or you're creating a lot of file size that doesn't need to be created, okay? Okay, I'm going to toggle that close. We now want to edit this image because this arm is in here and it's not moving, so it's not very dynamic if the arm isn't moving. We want to replace that still arm with moving, with actual motion, with an actual moving arm. So we need to edit that content out. So we need to go into the editing region. We need to isolate this layer. Just like we did last week when we did the right on effect, we had to double click on the icon to get into that image. Same thing here. So I'm going to go and click on the icon for seats. As soon as I do that, you'll notice in the top left-hand corner I have composition. That's the main composition. Now we're inside that composition and we're isolating the layer called seats. Okay, so right up there. And I'm just going to zoom out 50% so I can see it. So what we need to do is we need to mask out that content. As soon as I isolate a layer and I start using either a shape creation tool like a square or an oval or something like that, or I use my pen, it will automatically start creating a mask, okay? We're gonna use the pen because we have to customize our mask, so the shape's not gonna work. So click on our pen tool, and I always start way up over here on the left-hand side. Go wherever you want, you don't have to follow me, but I'll explain that in a moment. So you've got to start anywhere, somewhere anyway. So I'm going to start in the top right, and I'm just going to click, and I'm just going to pass these path points and their respective handles along the seats. And as always, you don't need to be too concerned with getting it perfect, because we can go back and we can edit this and modify it and perfect it. you've done it here, just go click. I hold down shift, I just like things to be organized as possible, so that just makes it a little bit cleaner of a selection. Now this is sort of like our record player from the Cinemagraph. When we were creating a mask of our record player, I had talked about when we actually selected the record player bed, the base of the record player turntable. I did the same thing. I made sure that these path points were outside of the image and well outside the image. Because if we apply any sort of thing, let's say we apply a blur or we're going to put a feather on this, which we're going to do, we don't want those effects to compromise the edges of our image. So if it's well outside of the image, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a pretty big feather for us to start encroaching on that image. So the edges will be nice and crisp, uncompromised by whatever we do to the mask that we've done in the center. Now, once you've drawn and completed your mask, you should be seeing what I have up on the screen, which is we've gotten rid of all of that interior content of our photo. Now what we need to do is just go in. I always just go in and grab an anchor and just pull it out just to see where it is and go, okay, that's where I want it. And, whoop, and then just modify as you need to. If you've got too many, so I might get rid of this, I don't know, let's see. I'll just do it for the sake of doing it. Let's go into the pen tool. I'm going to take the delete vertex tool, click on it, and then I'll go back to my selection tool. Just see if I can get that without that anchor point. Like always, the fewer anchor points that you're working with, the greater likelihood you'll have a cleaner selection. You need enough to achieve the desired result. Bear in mind this is video. Video, there's always moving things in the video, oftentimes more than one thing moving. Things are sequencing fairly quickly. It's a timeline-based thing. So you're not focused on detail quite the same as you would be on a website where it's static content and it's directly in front of your face and you can stare at it for hours if you want. So you'd really be able to analyze whether something's done perfectly or not, or print like the same thing. With this, we have a little bit of flexibility because it's not something someone's going to sit and analyze likely, and they have to play the video over and over and over to do that. But nevertheless, we want to get accurate as we possibly can. All right. So I've got it the way I want. Again, if it's not perfect, and it won't be, once we get other content in there, you'll probably recognize, hey, I did, you know, this part could be cleaned up. Don't worry, it's a mask. It can always be altered. You can always go back and fix it up. Now, what we should do is just look at the mask for a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to toggle open the seats layer in our timeline. It's now going to have a mask as well as a transform option. So if you toggle it open, you can see that. So I'm going to close my transform because I had it open earlier. I'm going to open up mask and open up mask 1. Just make this a little larger so you can see. There you go. And this is all global stuff. So the mask path, there's no keyframing. It's just, I just changed it. Now the mask feather, I do want to change. I want to add a little bit of feathering to this. Even though these are leather seats, they're fairly solid against whatever they're being shot against. There still should probably be some softening to the edge, even though they are leather. So I'm going to put on a feather. I'm not going to turn on the stopwatch. I do not need to keyframe this. I just need to make a global change. It's just going to be feathered for the entire video. So I don't need to keyframe that. So I'm just going to go to where it says mask feather, click on any one of the two values, and I'm going to put in 0.5, really small value, and it's just going to soften up that edge of that path a little bit. If you find, hey, I need a little bit more than that, then by all means put on a 1 or a 0.75, something like that. The other thing that we can do is we can take our mask expansion, So there it is. That's our mask expansion. We can play with what's being masked as it relates to the path that we've drawn. So if your path isn't exactly perfect, or you find that when you applied your feather, it's starting to cut into your seats a little bit, you'd rather do it the other way, cutting into the interior of the car, then just take that expansion and just push it out a little bit. So it would be going this way, or go in whatever direction you need. Okay, so I'm just gonna put that back to 0, because I think I did a reasonable job doing that. And I've got a 0.5 feather, so it just softens it up a bit. I'll just save that, just so I don't lose any of that work. Now we're in the editing region of this. What we're gonna do is we have to come back out of this. So I'm gonna click up here, composition test for interior, or click on this icon here, and it's gonna take me back to the main timeline, the main movie at size, and we can see that the mask is now being applied to do that. And when we hit play or hit the space bar to play this, there it is. So it looks good. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, let's take seats, click on seats, and then we're gonna go up to layer, and we're gonna go new, and we're gonna go to adjustment layer. Okay, that's gonna plug in an adjustment layer. And then when that adjustment layer is on, the adjustment layer is nothing. It's just void of information. It's just waiting for something to be plugged in or attached to it, just like an adjustment layer adjustment layer in Photoshop. Go to effect at the top. We'll go into color correction. You can choose any number of things in here. This is why I oftentimes will design in After Effects, even if I'm not going to animate it at all, because there's so much you can do with these effects that you can't do in After Effects, or in Photoshop. So I'm going to use curves, because I'm going to use curves for the other things as well. So I'm just going to use the same color correction for everything. So I'm going to hit curves, which is halfway down. And there we go. Now I'll just make a small change. I'll modify this later as I need to, but we'll just make a small change to make sure that everything's working. So click on RGB, and we'll go to red, and then just go to the very center of that red, that diagonal red line in our histogram for channels. And just look, if I pull it out this way, it takes all of those red values and starts to pull them out of those mid-range values. I'm starting to clip actually all of these shadowed areas. If I were to go the other way, then I could really blast the red out and intensify the amount of red that's there. Now obviously that's way too much, those are extremes. So I'm just gonna take the red, just pull it down ever so slightly from the midpoint of that histogram. I wanna remove some of the red that's in those seats. Okay, that's all I'm gonna do with that for now. And we'll come back and we'll work on that to compare it and match it with the other content that we're going to be using as part of this scene. So let's select seats, hold down shift, select the adjustment layer for that. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to create a composition out of these two layers. I want them to be their own thing, okay, their own movie. And so what I'm going to do is, with those both selected, they are layers. So I'm going to go up to layer in the top menu of After Effects, and I'm going to go all the way down, pretty much to the bottom, to where it says pre-compose. So I'm going to make a composition out of these previously established layers. So go pre-compose, say okay to that, and again we'll call this seats because. Again, it's just our seats. But you can call it seats if you want. Seats movie, if you sort of want to create a distinction between the seats that we're looking at, which is a static image in our first composition. This is saying, hey, this is the actual seats movie where it's moving, things are moving, okay? So I oftentimes would use movie to just categorize the sort of the root video. Then by default, it will say move all attributes into the new composition. Well, yes, obviously that's what I want to do. I want to create a brand new composition, but I want these to be in that composition. And all of the things that we just adjusted, they have to be part of that as well. So that's all that's telling you. Adjust composition duration, no, we'll leave that as is because we've already animated it. It's for the full 4 seconds, so we don't need to click on that. And then we can open the composition, so you can turn that on, turn that off, however you want to do that. We'll turn it off. We don't need to go into it at this point. We're done with it for now. So we'll turn off open new composition, just say okay. So we're still in the composition Tesla interior main movie, but now we have a composition in there called seats. And if I click on that, it turns off. There it is. Okay. I'll do a save just so I don't lose anything. All right. Let's pop out to our folder and let's look at this Tesla interior. That is the image that I found online that I thought, you know what, that's a pretty good match for the video that we're working on. So it was probably the best one. Colors off, but outside, and it's shot, it looks like daylight. It's actually probably shot in a showroom where there's just a lot of intense overhead lighting, I'm assuming, because it's pretty blasted out with light, and it's starting to really spill into the car as well. But that's okay, we'll fix a lot of that when we get it into After Effects. But that should be a reasonable substitute for the video one. So it's a PSD already, so let's just double click on it to open up Photoshop. We'll edit this in Photoshop just because Photoshop is easier to use for certain things. And for the purposes of this, it becomes a little easier to use. Oh, yours is different looking, sorry. I'm working from the file that I had yesterday. So let me download what you're working from, which is this. Okay, sorry, I was working from my file from yesterday from my other class. So it's a little bit different than yours. So it's not a PSD yet. So what we'll do is go to Tesla_interior.jpg, which is the same image. You can see the difference between this image is that the console has, it's changing based on the lighting conditions. So we want to go with a backlit because that's what the video has, okay? So let's control click or right click, and we'll go open with, and we'll open it this way in Photoshop, or drag it into Photoshop, do whatever you need to do. All right, there we are. And what we're gonna do is we will go back to our folder, grab the Tesla dash.jpg, and we'll just pull that into our file now, okay? And it will conform, regardless of what size it is, it's going to conform to the properties of our page. So it's not gonna be any larger because we're dragging it in. That's okay, because it needs to be made smaller anyway. So you'll see what we want to do is we want to rasterize this layer. Okay, we're going to work a little bit destructively here. Doesn't matter. We can redo this process really quickly. So I just like how this next function works better when we have a rasterized content, rasterized layer versus having it set up as a smart object or something like that. Okay. So just come over to this image that we brought in. Right click, okay, and we're just going to go down to rasterize layer. This is just going to make it a fully editable image, so we can destroy it if we want to in Photoshop. But it is a destructive process. Okay, so there it is. Now with that converted, what I want us to do is hit Command I, all right, or Control I. What that does is it takes all the colors and inverses them. Okay, so this is the exact opposite of the image that we were looking at just previously. Okay, so a lot of orange in there. because there was a lot of blue in the original one. So the complementary color is the opposite color. Then I want us to go to opacity. Let's put in something like 40. Okay. Now the reason I'm inversing it is because it allows me to see that I'm perfectly on top of the object that I'm mapping it to. The reason I want to change the opacity is so I can see through it, and I can actually match it up, right? So you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to zoom in, just so you can see it a little bit better. And I want to go into now edit, and I want to go into transform, and I'm going to go into distort. Distort is a destructive transform feature. We're going to pull this thing all around. But because the image is larger and we're making it smaller, we're not going to lose quality. All right. If anything, we're going to tighten up the quality, even though it is destructive. So distort gives us all our handles, and now what you can do is you can just start pulling this image into place. Now the images aren't identical. It's the same dashboard, but they're not identical. The settings are in different places and that sort of thing. So don't try to match up absolutely everything. What you want to do is try to match up fixed objects. So the top left-hand corner, there's an X. That's a fixed object. That's going to be the same. The button over on the top right, that's going to be the same. Same location, same information. Likewise, for controls at the bottom of the little car icon, that's going to be the same. And then furthermore, this feature over here, volume, that's going to be the same. Now our original image is maybe a little bit bigger than this, but that's okay. Just get it to where you think it works. Now the inverse, the reason I've inversed this image is so that when I'm matching it up, if you see sort of a bevel effect, it means you don't have the object on it perfectly. If you see it turn from what looks like a bevel effect, with sort of two layers of detail, to something that goes completely flat, that means you have it mapped on perfectly. Now we probably won't get this perfect, but we'll get it close. You can see that X is looking pretty good. I'm using my trackpad, so I'm not as good with finding when you release the trackpad, sometimes it snaps to something different.
Oh, Professor,
Yeah.
can you show again the first step in the make mask?
How to get this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Here, let me undo it. I'll undo it. Okay? Just let me zoom out. So I'll let you get rid of this because I'll rip you. Thanks for asking though. So if you miss anything, just yell at me because there's a lot of steps here. So I've just got the one image. Okay? There's my image. And then what I've done is I've just gone into my folder, just dragged my dash on, just say okay to that, just to commit it. Then I'm rasterizing this layer just because I want to do that inverse. I can inverse with a smart filter, but it disallows the smart filter while you're distorting, so it doesn't really help you when you're trying to do what you're doing. So that's why I'm rasterizing it. Once it's rasterized, so I did that by control clicking or right clicking and just going down to rasterize layer. Once that's done, hit Command I or Control I. That's just inversing the layer, so the color is the opposite. Then I went to opacity and just dropped it down to 40% so I can see through it. I'll zoom in. And then I went into edit, I went into transform, and I went into distort. So edit, transform, distort. Distort's going to allow me to grab my handles on all four corners and pull them to where I want them to be. All right, we'll distort it, pull it into place. right, so things are matching up pretty nicely. The magnification on the two images are going to be a little bit different, so that's why we're seeing it's not fitting absolutely perfect with the original, but that's okay, that they're in the same location. They'll communicate the same sort of detail and information that we need. But then we also have, the settings are just in different settings, so the low and the high and that sort of thing. Okay, that looks pretty good. Once you have it where you want, just hit enter or return. We have to turn everything back to normal, so I'm going to put on my Tesla there that we've been working on, that we just distorted. We're going to work with that, okay? So get it into place, and then we'll do the next step. How are we doing? Have I lost anyone? We're good, okay. Yeah, just yell at me if I go over it too quickly or need a repeat on something, not a problem. Okay, assuming we have that done, let's zoom in so we can see the top of this. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go to this layer that we've been working on, have it selected, then put a mask, a layer mask on it. So go down to the bottom of layers and click on the add layer mask icon. Hit D on your computer and then X to bring the foreground color to black. So you want this set to black. Okay. Then hit B on your computer. B will give you your brush. And I'm just going to dynamically change this on screen so you can see what I'm doing. But I want a brush that's probably something similar, maybe a little bit larger than the circle where the X is. Okay? But I want some feather applied to it. So I've got to take the hardness of this brush and reduce its percentage. So I've got mine set to about, what is it, 36 there. It doesn't have to be identical to mine, but just something in there. Once you have a brush, we're good to go. Okay. Then what I want to do is I want to hit 5 on my keyboard. So 5 will take the opacity of the brush and bring it down by 50%. So when I start using the brush, you're not going to see a hard cut. You're going to see a more subtle effect. And we want to sort of do this gradually. That's why I've made it 50%. You can hit 4, make it 40%. We do want this to sort of be a gradual thing. So what I want to do, I'll zoom in a little bit more. I want to come over here. I want to have my brush outside of the image and about halfway. So about halfway of it being on and halfway of it being off. So if I were to move my brush over, here's the top of the object that we're working on, the layer that we're working on right there. So you can see if I continue that top, it would cut that circle right in half. That's where I want it. Now what I want to do is I want to click once. Just click once. So I'm going to hit my trackpad, click. Then I'm going to just move over here and put my cursor on the opposite side, but the same place where it was originally on the left-hand side. I want to hold down the Shift key, and then I want to click again. And what that will do is it will cut a perfectly horizontal strip out of that object. Okay, it's not actually cutting it, we're putting a mask on, so it looks like it's cutting it out, but we're just putting a layer mask on. But we're just doing it in a sequence, in one pass, horizontal pass, so that we know it's a nice, it doesn't look odd, it's not, it's angular. Okay, so that's only done at 50%. I set mine to 40. Do the same thing. Just come over to this side, or you can start over on this side if you want, because you're already over here, right? So you click once, space bar over, so you can see this side. Hold down Shift, put your cursor more or less in the same spot, and then click again. Just do that until you no longer see that top line. So between the feathering, the opacity, and the multiple passes of it, you're going to get this nice gradual transition. Okay, it's a smooth, nice feathered edge. You can do the same thing here. If you want to just take a little slice out of this, you go up here, and if you come back down here, same idea. We can just chop away a little bit. And likewise over here, one click here, go up here. Now you can't really hold, there. It's good. Okay, so we started that. We got to do one thing at the bottom, but we'll wait and see how that looks when we flip this around. So let's go back and click on the thumbnail for this object. Okay. And we're going to inverse it back. So Command-I or Control-I on a PC flips it back to its original value. It's still, the opacity is still low, so I'm going to take the opacity back up to 100, and there's our new object. Okay, you can turn it on and off and just see how it sort of sits nicely in the same location where it was before. Now the bottom is very sharp, so we need to clean up the bottom edges. So let me zoom in on the bottom edge. And the same idea, click on our mask, our layer mask. Click on your brush. I'm gonna make my brush a little bit smaller because I'm magnified in now. I'm gonna hit 80 on my, or 8 on my keyboard to make this 80%. And then I'm just gonna follow the contour of what's underneath, which is just this rounded part of the console. Just sort of chop away the edge, the sharp edge. Same thing over here, just chop that away just by just giving a bit of a diameter. There we go. Okay, so now we've got that sitting in there nicely. Now the problem is, of course, we have two different colors. So let's put on, we used the curves before for our seats, even though we didn't really do anything with curves, we just sort of took the red out of it a little bit. We'll go back and adjust this to match what we do here. But let's click on the bottom layer, which is this original photo of the interior of the car. And we'll go down to adjustment layers and click on adjustment layer and go to curves. So we're adding an adjustment layer to the bottom layer, which is our main image of our interior. Click on curves, brings up our histogram. Again, it has red in it, so I'd go over to the red channel and pull that out a little bit. So as soon as I start pulling that out, what I'm doing is I'm eliminating the amount of red that the luminant values are presenting in this image, okay? So sort of pull that back. This has a little bit of green in it, so I might go to the green channel and pull it out a little bit just to introduce or bring out a little bit more of those green values. And then I might go to the blue and likewise adjust it to match it. Now we could put an adjustment layer as well on this, because we might not be able to achieve the effect by just changing the color of the one object. So if I put one on this one with an adjustment layer, I might be able to pull out some of the green values so it's not overtly green. Bring in some of those blues and purples back in. Maybe you can go to red, ramp the red up a little bit because the car that's being displayed in that visual is red, so it's nice to bring out some of those values. And now they're starting to match up a little bit better. And then of course, because this adjustment layer is being applied to the dashboard console, that is sitting up in our layer stack. So these adjustments are now changing everything. We don't want that. We want to clip it just to the object we want to affect. So make sure you're clicking on this icon right here. This clips this adjustment layer to this particular layer and no other layer. So as soon as I do that, watch what happens to the interior of the car. It changes back to that green because it's no longer being affected by this. So bring out some of those reds. just go back and forth, just check, adjust. See, adjust it. Looks pretty good. Now, the dash is darker than our car. So what we want to do is we're going to change that as well. So go to your adjustment layer for the car, or for the interior of the car. So this layer right here, that's on and off. Go to that adjustment layer, which is curves. And we're going to put on what's called an S-curve. I know we've worked with S-curves before. I think maybe last term, maybe we did this term, I don't know. But I know for sure we did last term, design image 1. So what we're going to affect this time is the RGB channel. So how we want the luminant values to appear across all 3 of our channels across this entire image, okay? So click on RGB, that is the white diagonal line. And then I'm going to click in the first quadrant on that line and pull down. As soon as I pull down, you can see that I'm deepening all the darker values. So any value that is a certain luminance, sort of the darker values of our image, we're deepening them. So we're saying in here where it's darker naturally, I want to make it darker still. I want to remove any light that's coming out of that object. And then conversely, if I were to go to the top quadrant along that diagonal RGB line, the parent channel, I can intensify the light values. Now, I probably don't want to do too much because you can already see we've got a lot of hot points in our design where there's a lot of extreme light where we don't see any detail. So we don't really need probably a lot of whites being influenced there, but we do know we want to make it a little bit darker so it matches the console, but this obviously is too dark. So I'm going to pull that back out, make it dramatic, because it's quite dark in the video, so I'm going to pull that down a bit, something like that. And like I say, if I wanted to lighten up some of the other regions, I could pull that up. I'm not going to do that because I think, so it's not really an S-curve, because typically an S-curve you would click here to intensify light areas or to increase light through those light areas, but I don't want that S-curve. I just want to have this bowing curve here. Okay, and the higher you go up and pull down, the more of those luminant values you're going to affect across the entire image, okay? So the histogram is broken up into sort of, they're quadrants, but there's sort of 3 main components to it. On the left-hand side, we have pure black, which is represented here by this slider. And then on the right-hand side, we have pure white, our highlights, so shadows, highlights, which is represented on the right-hand side. So these little lines that we're seeing, there's an individual vertical line that makes up 255 values. But it's actually 256 in total because black is also a value. It's 0, right? So it's 0, and then 1 through 255. So then 256 in total. So there's a lot of luminance that we have control over. But the majority of the luminant value of this image exists here in our midtones. Those values of, let's call them gray, the sort of dark gray to light gray, that is what's going to have the most effect in terms of how we influence the amount of light that passes through this image. So that's why we're starting in the center typically when we do these things and pulling either down or up to increase those colors or the luminant values for those colors across the entire image, okay? So this is nice and dark. Like the video, it's quite dark as well. Okay, we're good with this. This is done. So we can go Command S or Control S. It's going to open up our window because we haven't saved this yet. It's a PSD file because we have layers now. It was a JPEG before, but now we have layers. So now it's saying, hey, do you want to save this as a PSD file? Absolutely, I do. So just say, okay. Actually, what we'll do, Yeah, I would save this, let's save it. For if we need to come back or wanna come back, it's good to have it as an open PSD document with all the layers. But I don't think we need them in After Effects that way, we just need it as a flat object. So once you've saved it, let's go back into the file, let's go to layer, and let's go down to flatten image, flatten image. We're gonna flatten all those layers, we're gonna put them right down into one layer. And then I don't wanna compress it, I wanna leave the quality as what it is in Photoshop, which is the best quality it's gonna be with the original content. So let's go File, Save As again, and let's just call it interior, and then we'll put a hyphen after it and call it flat, just so we know it's the flattened version of it. We'll leave it at Photoshop, but we'll make it flat. Okay, say okay to that or save. And then we should undo this. We'll just go, well, let's undo that just so you don't accidentally save it. All right. So let's go back to After Effects. And we'll grab that file that we just saved, the one that says flat, PSD. Go into After Effects, make sure we're in project. Yours might be saying effect controls like mine is, because that's the last thing that we used. So go to the top right hand corner to those two arrows, click on it, and just go to project. So we can see all the assets for this project in that folder. And then let's take the flat PSD file and just pull it into our project. Once it's in our project, let's pull that in and we'll put it below seats in our timeline. Now at this point we could go back into seats to modify how our seats look in relation to our interior of our Tesla. So I might zoom in 100%, go yeah, those seats look, they have a lot more red, they're sort of flat in color compared to what's going on there. So what I might do is then just double click on seats and go to my adjustment layer and just go again back up to effect controls because we already have curves in there and say, okay, well what did I do to it? Well, it has a bit more green, and it has a bit more blue. So I'm gonna pull those channels up a little bit. And then I'm gonna take my RGB channel, take that white line, pull it down, and I might make a little bit of an S-curve out of it, just hold the highlights up a bit, and just see how that looks. So now that we have our main composition, and we've created a second composition, that shows up down here. So we have our Tesla interior main movie, the main movie that is going to contain everything that makes up our sequence. And then inside of that we have another composition based on all the same properties as the main movie, but it is specific to the seats. So what I need to do is it's underlined, right? So I need to get from this, which is what we're doing to edit here, and I need to go back to the main movie to compare it with that interior of the car. So when I click on this tab, now I can see it all together. Now I've got way too much blue in there, so I've got to go back to my adjustment layer here and go, okay, let's get rid of some of that blue. Pull it out a bit, and maybe just go to my green channel and pull it out a little bit, just to get a bit more green in those seats. Back to Tesla main movie. Now it's starting to look a lot closer. There we go. Command S, Control S, just so we don't lose anything that we've done. And there we go, we've got a pretty good match. Pretty good match. How's everyone doing? Everybody got to that point? Everybody good? All right. All right, let's do one more thing before we go on break, and that is we need to get rid of that window. I want to put some atmospherics in there to give a little bit more life to this video, even though the original video doesn't have that. It is shot dark though, it's shot at night, or the idea that it's shot at night because it doesn't have quite that light, but we need to get rid of it. So, just stop our movie. Just gonna hit I, bring it back. We need to go into now our Tesla interior flat PSD in our timeline. So go in the timeline, click on the Photoshop icon twice, and it brings us, isolates our file. And you can tell you're in there because this has a purple timeline. So as soon as you see that purple timeline, you know you're in the right spot for it. So we want to get rid of the window. So let's take the pen tool and just create a mask. And the reason we're inside this editing region is because this is where we have to apply our masks. Chop that away. There we go. All I need to really focus on are these anchor points up here, because that's the part we're going to see. And then just use your tools just to move those anchor points around, get it the way you want it. Again, I might put on a little bit of feathering. It's a hard object, but a tiny bit of feathering never hurt anything because it just makes it look a little bit more natural. And again, it might just be a 0.5 or a 0.75. Just barely noticeable. You really don't notice it, but it's there. It's working for you, even though it doesn't look like it's even there. Then I go back to my composition over here. I can click away. I'll save it again, and I'll just hit the space bar. Looks pretty good. Color's not quite right still. I think my sheets need a tiny bit more blue, only because the image that we're using for the interior just has a lot of blue in it, shot during the day, so it just takes on all those values. Okay, well, we'll leave it there, so just do a save if you haven't done so. Take a break, take a 15-minute break, right at 1:15, so that's perfect. Come back just after 1:30. And we'll probably get to our green screen. So we got a couple things to do yet, but then we'll get to the green screen part of it. I'll turn the blue off so you're